Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, et bienvenue à la Comité des finances et de développement économique. On va commencer la réunion dans une minute. We'll ask all members of council to take their seat. Anyone who wishes to speak to an item that's on the agenda, if they could sign up under the television screen. On va commencer dans quelques secondes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Bienvenue. Any declarations of interest? Déclaration d'intérêt? Confirmation of minutes, adoption de procès-verbaux pour le 10 septembre 2018 for the minutes of the September 10th, 2018. Carried. Communications as presented. We have a presentation from Mr. Manconi. And we'll just go through the rest of the agenda. Office of City Clerk and Solicitor, Bureau du Greffier municipal et de l'Avocat général, Legislative Services, rapport sur le comité consultatif sur les services en français, rapport annuel 2017-2018, French Language Services Advisory Committee, 2017-2018. Received. No in-camera items, information previously distributed, charitable and vacancy rebates, annual report, rapport annuel de 2017 pour les meubles inoccupés organismes de bienfaisance, et aussi Property Assessment Appeals, the Assessment Review Appeal Board, and those are both received. Okay, so we have a presentation. We'll ask Mr. Manconi and his team to come forward on the status of light rail transit. And I believe Mr. Cripps is going to join him as well. We'll let him get set up, and we'll begin in just a moment. On va commencer dans une minute.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, members of the committee. I want to start off today's presentation with highlighting some key milestones, and these milestones are important as they're, you've heard me talk over and over again in all the previous updates. What are the indicators or the markers that show that we're making progress in the key area that is important for the moving to revenue service, which is the testing and commissioning phase. And so we've achieved, RTG has achieved some key milestones that I want to highlight for you. First, trains are running in test mode from Tunney's Pasture to Blair through the entire corridor, including the tunnel. For example, last night we had 4 trains in the afternoon. That stepped up to 5, and then last evening we had about 6. We had 6 trains, and we did about 55 trips end to end in full CBTC mode. So the communication-based train control system was working. Those were single trains last evening. Item number 2, and again another indicator, a marker that shows we're trending in the right direction in terms of testing and commissioning. A couple of weeks ago, RTG completed a critical test. It's called the line speed test, and it drives out 4 deliverables. The first is it confirms that the train can run from end to end from Tunney's to Blair within the prescribed end-to-end travel time. So it would achieve that. So that was a very good indicator. And that travel time also includes the second bullet, which is the station dwell times. Those are the various and different dwell times at each station to enable the doors to open and close based on the volume projections of the various stations. It also achieved a top speed of 83 kilometers an hour. The average line speed is substantially lower than that, obviously, when you factor in all the stops and starts. And it ran in full CBTC mode from Tunney's to Blair. So that's a major milestone that we want to acknowledge RTG has achieved. With respect to the East End stations, bullet number 3, I'm happy to report that the East End stations are essentially complete. Mr. Willis and his team have a dedicated crew of inspectors, and all the inspections are nearing completion, and now RTG is applying for the occupancy permits, which Mr. Willis and his team are indicating are about to be issued for the East End stations. I'm also happy to report that all fare gates and fare vending machines have been installed. You recall we used the Trillium line as the proof of concept, So we've completed all the installations on the Confederation line, and now we're moving into testing and commissioning to make sure all those systems and subsystems are communicating. Item 5 is the SCADA software. That's the operations control room systems that they use to monitor the system and to adjust subsystems as they need to, depending on various situations. That's under testing and commissioning also. And number 6 is an important point, and it's a key takeaway from today's presentation. RTG has put forward a proposal that we are 100% supportive of, and that's they want to launch a practice plan later this month, which involves running from Tunney's to Blair with the equivalent of the full fleet complement. And it's important in that that is, again, another indicator that we'll be able to see if they're successful in that as to how the system is performing and is it doing everything it's intended to do. They are not contractually obligated to do this, and this is totally different than what's called trial running, which I'll talk about later on in the presentation. So they want to rehearse and practice the system to see where they are in terms of overall requirements and is it doing what it's intended to do. And then lastly, number 7 on key milestones is when we go to revenue service, the trains get positioned out on the track very early in the morning. So if it's a 6 a.m. start, we will be out there 2 hours earlier, positioning the trains out along the corridor. And there's a process from getting them from the maintenance storage facility out to the main line. So there was a test that RTG did with our staff and our operators, and that went through successfully. So it demonstrated that the system can do that. Next, Mr. Mayor, I want to show you and the committee this video. You're going to go on a train ride from Blair all the way to Tunney's pasture. So there you have it, Mr. Mayor. That's when they do the testing and commissioning from one end of the system to the other. It gives you an inside look at all the details, including the tunnel and all the critical components. As you can tell, there's a lot to the system, and we're progressing in the right direction. I now want to walk you through the various elements of the station, starting off in the east. As I mentioned earlier, these stations are complete, and the last piece is to get occupancy permits in them. So we're highlighting for you today some of the amenities in the East End stations, a lot of the things that you've added that make these stations iconic and certainly world-class in terms of being a multimodal operation. You recall you added ample parking for bicycles and mops and so forth. Certainly when you look at some of the stations and you see the last pieces coming together, everything from decals on doors to wayfinding systems, it's an indicator that we're reaching that final stretch. So this is inside Saint Laurent. Tremblay Station, the pole-mounted O that lights up at night. You've seen many tweets of that. It's an indicator. It's a wayfinding system, and certainly important for getting people to our stations. Herdman is complete. You'll recall there was a lot of work that was remaining on that station there, and I've given for you today a shot of some of the nighttime perspectives. Lighting is on the stations. They're doing everything that's needed during nighttime operations, which includes lighting level tests to make sure that it's meeting the specifications for our customers and for the operations. To the far left, I draw your attention to the iconic lantern that our great architect has put in these station designs, those white large kiosks. They have the O that's embedded in there. You will see that along with the far left is the wayfinding O that's lit up at night that helps our customers. So they simply look for the O and you'll find the LRT stations. Ottawa, finishing touches are occurring there also. And an example of some of the wayfinding and the connections for our pedestrians and cyclists and all users of our infrastructure. Fare gates and vending machines, they're all installed, as I said earlier on, but also an example of how it's integrated into the station. So our vending machines don't stick out of the wall. They're embedded into the architectural features. And again, I can tell you it's drawing a lot of attention from the transit industry as being first of its kind in terms of its design and functionality. With respect to the underground stations, you'll recall there was a lot of work that was remaining on Rideau. RTG continues to operate 24/7. You can see the progress they have made here. Ceiling tiles and ceramic floors are in. Lighting. The backdrop of that picture is the artwork. That's etched glass that you can look down into the platform level. And to the far left are speakers for announcements and so forth, and wayfinding systems. This is at the platform level. Down below Rideau, and just a reminder, that red fence that you see, that is a temporary fence that enables us to do the train testing and commissioning and go through at design speeds for our testing process. Other elements of Rideau Station, this is a connection point. It demonstrates certainly all the crews that are working concurrently, but the finishing touches to Rideau Station are underway from a build perspective. Ceiling tiles, wayfinding, art cases on the right-hand side, and escalators and stairs are all being finished and commissioned. This is another significant milestone for RTG. The excavation portals for the work that was occurring on Rideau Station, including the ventilation grates and so forth, are all complete. So Rideau Street is in a new state from a rehab perspective in terms of being closed up from the excavation works. Parliament, ceramic tiles on the right-hand side on the wall, wayfinding, escalators, and so forth. And then also today we wanted to demonstrate a few of the above-ground station connections that, again, are nearing completion. So that's Lion. Once you remove the hoarding and some of the fencing, everything is done there. This is a great shot of inside of Lion Station. I can tell you, members of committee, that it is a meticulously designed piece of infrastructure. The acoustics in there are phenomenal. It's not like a cavernous old-style subway where acoustically it doesn't work. All that's left to be done there is some LED lights in those columns that you see throughout the concourse. So to the left are escalators, to the right are stairs, elevators in the middle, and so forth. Fare gates are down at the far end. The streetscaping is nearing completion. Also, Queen Street. This is between Metcalfe and O'Connor, so you're seeing the final stages of that. And now we move to the west stations. This is a great shot of Pimisi from an architectural perspective. It draws you in. It shows the wood ceiling tiles, the wayfinding systems, the roof lines. And what's important about Pimisi, Mr. Mayor, you are not only building an LRT system, you are building a multimodal transportation system. You invested in MUPs. You invested in cycling lanes, and you recall we had a challenge on this Booth Street, and thanks to Mr. Cripps and his team, who've done a phenomenal job. I'm happy to report that the cycling lanes are now incorporated and are nearing the final stages of markings and so forth. So the cycling community, I know, is highly critical of this connection, and thanks to some very good ingenuity from Mr. Cripps and the LC Transport team and others, we figured this one out. So we'll have those lanes on that bridge. Bayview Station, amazing plazas throughout the system. This one's your connection point to the north-south and to all that development that's going to be occurring there. Again, bicycle connection points. You step down to the Trillium Line area. There's artwork. You remember there's criticism that we didn't have connectivity. We have connectivity with MUPS. We've invested in a cycling connection on the other side, so it's fully integrated, and you're going both north, south, east, west in all modes throughout the city at this point. Tunney's Pasture is the end of the line for now until you break ground on Stage 2, and there's great work being done here on final landscaping on the plaza and here in the forefront, where they're doing some great masonry work with walls and landscaping features, and then a great shot of the ceiling lighting feature that's through the sunlight, through the skylight, with those multicolored lenses that they have in there. I now want to move to the testing and commissioning of the CBTC system, the communication-based train control. Remember, that controls the entire train operation. It's been used around the world. It's proven technology. It puts safety at the forefront. So the east is almost complete. The underground testing is underway, and the west is nearing completion also for the communication-based train control system, and I'm happy to report that is going very well. RTG shares metrics and testing protocols, and Mr. Cripps and his team oversee that, and this part of the project is trending very well. With respect to the vehicles and the interface with that train control system, we have now transitioned to double car consists, so 2 trains connected together. Again, another major milestone. And as I've said all along, we're looking for those indicators that move us into the end state of how this train operation needs to work. There's integrated testing through the full alignment in terms of the trains being tested. And they can operate multiple vehicles with full control from end to end, as we proved again last night with up to 6 trains running at full line speed, I might add. Commissioning of the CBTC system continues and will for several weeks. And we are practicing numerous maneuvers. As you saw in the video, there's crossover tracks and the maintenance and storage facility. We're doing maneuvers both manually and with the communication-based train control system. And as I said in my opening slide, RTG is focusing on that practice plan and the details, providing us those details so that they can launch that hopefully in the end of November, and we get an inside look as to how the entire system is working. With respect to operational systems, the SCADA system, that's our control functionality that our controllers use. I'm happy to report that they've delivered that software. There is classroom training that's underway. Once the full commissioning is completed, we then move to in-field training. And another milestone at the end of this slide is the RTG has moved their testing regime into our control center, which I'll show you a picture of in a moment. So the Transit Operation Control Center, the TOCC, many of you have been there. This is a first in North America. I often talk about how in Ottawa we don't brag about some of the things that we've done, but I've been to New York City, Boston, and we've been to Philadelphia and other large operations. Nobody has what you're building in Ottawa, a fully integrated multimodal control system, all modes, train, electric, diesel, bus, para, and security, all integrated under one system. Why is that important? You can adjust the systems on the fly. You can make adjustments for winter conditions, breakdowns, and so forth. And this part of the project is being watched by the transit world. This is the center. To the right, those screens up on the far right are the bus screens and a direct feed from our Traffic Operations Control Center, fully integrated into here. To the left are the screens that are being tested and commissioned for rail operations, and what's not visible to you is the transit security screens, the cameras, the emergency alarms, and the panic systems, all those feed into this control center, and that way we have a full vision of the entire operation. Now, the civil build is important, but you also have to be operational ready, and I want to share with you some of the significant milestones we've achieved on the city side of things. So the bus to rail connections are critical. The train system is important, but we're going to continue to rely on our very efficient bus system. We are going to feed customers at various stations throughout the network, and the three major transfer points are Tunney's, Herdman, and Blair. We want to make sure those systems are working as designed. So we've done simulations, we've done paper tabletop exercises, and we've done computer simulation of the bus maneuvers throughout those stations. And we took it a step further. Again, this hasn't been done, but we wanted to be proactive. We are testing each one of those three transfer points using mock service scenarios. So we've taken bus and staff and we've pushed volume through those stations to see how they will perform. I'm happy to report that Herdman was done on October 28th, and it performed very, very well. We're finalizing all the results from the observation tests and so forth. We now move to Tunney's and to Blair. And I just want to share with you some photos. This is we started at 4 in the morning. We took about 40, 50 buses, and we started to stress test the platforms and created situations, including mock incidents, accidents, and so forth. This is a scenario where we're trying to actually get the system jammed to see how far we can go to prevent any chaos and so forth. So the system performed very, very well. So Herdman has a great green box attached to it from a bus to rail transfer perspective. Next is the great work that we're doing with our emergency partners. Thank you to Mr. DeMonte and Chief Bordelot. They have been great partners throughout this. I get many questions about what are we doing for emergency training exercises and risk management and so forth. I can assure members of council we have a risk registry. We have hundreds of scenarios that we've mapped out. We add another layer of complexity in that we are the nation's capital, and we have safety protocols that are confidential in nature. We are right near the Parliament District, so we need to be cognizant of that. So there's been numerous training exercises, and then we've gone from paper to tabletop to in the field, and it includes all our partners, police, paramedics, fire, and other city departments, including emergency operations group. And the purpose of that is to practice and to ensure that we're ready for what could potentially occur. You will always have an incident. You need to be ready for them. And these shots show you the mobilization of the various partners. And not only are they there, but they're also bringing their equipment and their skills and their training to the forefront. Great partners. They enjoyed these exercises, and the learnings were great. We do not reinvent the wheel. There are other agencies out there that have these types of operations, so we take the best practices from them, and we take the knowledge from our emergency partners and incorporate them. Training is ongoing, including our operators and our controllers and all city staff. A reminder that OC Transpo is going through the most significant change organizationally in the history, and it's not just about operating the trains. It's customer service, it's call intake, it's planning, it's operations and supervisory services also. So it impacts the entire organization. These are some exercises in the maintenance and storage facility with our great staff doing pre-trip inspections and so forth. This was during that handover exercise that I mentioned early on. That's a train going through the yard and over the switches. So, Mr. Mayor, the key activities that we continue to monitor, and I will again emphasize, we're looking for progress and indicators in the testing and commissioning environment. So we are working hand in hand with RTG to complete and embrace the details associated with that practice plan that they're bringing forward. It ensures what I've talked about over and over again, that is the system performing the way it's supposed to, with run times, speed, dwell times, and all the subsystems and major systems working. We continue to watch Rideau, Parliament, and the West stations to get them to the state of completeness that the East End stations have achieved. And we're coordinating with our building code services as we need to secure occupancy permits, or RTG needs to secure permits. There's the full complement of vehicles operating in CBTC mode along the entire alignment, the end-to-end vehicle testing, and system verifications. What does that mean? It's not just the trains operating, the next train announcement on the platforms, the announcements in the trains, all those pieces working together as designed, and the full fleet system operational testing from Blair to Tunney's. So lastly, Mr. Mayor, if the look ahead are these 7 elements. RTG successfully launches their practice plan, and hopefully that goes well. We'll learn from that. They'll learn from that. Again, that's not a contractually obligated step. It's a very good proactive measure that our external experts have also endorsed, and Mr. Cripps and myself and our team certainly applaud RTG for doing this initiative. You then can move on to safety sign-off by the safety auditor, a reminder that they need to go through everything, all the documentation, and ensure that the system is safe and reliable. You can then move to substantial completion if that gets signed off. You then move to trial running, and trial running is a prescribed protocol that they need to pass, and that's why doing this first step is helpful for RTG. They can see if there's any bugs in the system, and they can be proactive and get to trial running and get a higher level of confidence. With respect, and then they can, if they pass trial running, they can move to RSA, and I'll get to that in a moment in terms of where we are with that, because I know that's a question out there. And then we move to revenue service. And then lastly, with city costs, we continue to track all our costs. We're continuing to use the project agreement to hopefully recover all those costs through the process. And our treasurer and myself and our staff are working on the memo that Councillor Deans, I know, has asked for in terms of what are all the costs, and we'll be bringing that forward once it's completed. We're not all there yet. We're grabbing all the pieces associated with that. With respect to revenue service availability, our position continues to be that it's sometime in Q1 of 2019. RTG is aware of that. With respect to the specific date, RTG has made it clear to us, and both myself, Mr. Cripps, and the city manager agree, we want a date that assures as much certainty as they can provide. We want a reliable date. We want a date that's based on technical findings. We want a date that's aligned to what I've been telling Council all the time, is that you need to see those markers moving in the right direction, those indicators on testing and commissioning. So Q1 2019 is what I can provide you today. There's still work to be done, and to be candid, there are very good days on testing and commissioning, and there are challenging days, and that's what you want. You want to find out where the issues are, and you want to proactively deal with them. The goal, the outcome is very crystal clear: a safe, reliable system that gets the taxpayers the $2.1 billion investment in accordance with the project agreement. That's our relentless pursuit, Mr. Mayor, and that's our focus. We want to give the customers and the taxpayers exactly what they're paying for. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Manconi, Mr. Cripps, and your entire team. I think when people see the video, they're going to be quite proud and excited of the progress that's been made end to end. We recognize there's still a lot of work to be done, but we appreciate getting the commitment for the first quarter of 2019 as well. So, questions from members of council? Councillor Deans.
Well, thank you, and I recognize how big this project is and how many parts of the system need to work together in order to make this work. So it looks like you're moving forward in the right direction. I think I agree with you. It's very hard to say with any certainty when it's going to be ready, because it'll be ready when it's ready, and probably not until then. But you talked about the practice plan, and I wondered if the practice plan involves people. Like, I remember when we did Presto, we did Friends and Family sort of as a soft launch, put people on the system and try it out before you put everybody on day one when it goes into revenue service. So does that include people?
That part of the practice plan, no, but we have a separate exercise with full loads, with staff volunteering, and we're looking for non-transit customers, people that don't typically use the system, because often if you get, if I load it up with a bunch of OC Transpo drivers and staff as an example, they know how to use the system. We're looking for people that aren't as familiar with it. So we have a full test that will be doing exactly that outside of that practice plan, and a number of other tests also.
So do you have any time frame for that yet?
Not yet. We have all the pieces coming together in terms of the actual plan, the number of people we need, and so forth. We want them to get through the practice plan, and then we want to get into the next phase, which would be these various tests that we need to do.
Okay, so we still don't have a firm date for revenue service, and we clearly still have a lot of challenges with our bus system. And I know you've given all those pink slips to the drivers, so how are you dealing with the driver issues?
So we've extended their work, obviously. We have told them the best we can tell them is sometime in Q1 of 2019. We continue to have a fantastic relationship with ATU 279 and with all the unions, and so they're fully cooperative. They understand, and the presidents understand that once we have a date that has that high probability from RTG and high confidence level, then we can adjust the notices to the union, to the operators. They're still sticking around, and they've been very, very loyal to the company.
So we're not losing any of those drivers that have received layoff notices?
No, we've seen none of that trend, and I commend them for doing that. Are some of them actively looking for employment? Absolutely. We actually have measures in place. We're working with our HR team that we're helping them, CV preparation and so forth, so that when they do get their layoff notice, they're positioned for other work. And I have other transit agencies calling me, asking them to consider applying. I know Kingston's expanding, Montreal's looking for 500 operators and so forth, so we're bridging all those opportunities and we're passing those on.
Okay. At the last update, you were asked to consider how we could freeze fares before revenue service, because I think the fare increases take place in January. So have you got an answer to that question today?
Yes, we are not increasing the fares. We're going to bring all of that to you as part of the budget process. So the direction was taken. The Treasurer and I spoke, and we spoke to Mr. O'Connor. So legislatively, from a governance perspective, we're not increasing fares, and we're going to bring forward a report as part of the budget process.
Okay. Many of us have just been through a grueling exercise of checking in with our electors, and we heard a lot about public transit during the election campaign and about the problematic transit service that exists today, the bus routes, the canceled trips, the late trips, all of it. And I have asked for a number of routes in my ward to be reviewed, and basically the answer I got back was, well, we agree there's been canceled trips and late trips and problematic trips, and it's difficult for the users, but it's no worse than anybody else's, which is not really an acceptable answer to me or to the transit riders in my ward. So what are you going to do between now and when that revenue service on the LRT starts to address the real and problematic problems of the existing transit routes today?
So I hear the message loud and clear. I've had many councillors talk to me about the challenges, and the reality is the following. You have a couple of things. There is no playbook for this. Nobody has done this in the world, taken the busiest BRT and put 5 detours in place for an extended period of time. As we know, we've done a fairly good job of that in terms of figuring out how to do that. I always thank our customers because I know the stress they're under. It is a challenge for them. We are, when it's bad, it's bad. One little hiccup in the downtown core tips the entire interline system. You have an interline system, and those buses that are on detour get caught up in the same traffic that anybody else does. And so what we're doing with our team is, where we can, we fill in with what limited spare buses we have as part of our operational plan. We'll work individually with each councillor to explore ideas. I just finished an extensive process with Councillor Harder and Councillor Deans. If there's challenges in your ward, I wasn't aware that there are. I'm happy to bring an integrated team. We'll think outside the box, because We want to take care of the customer. And, you know, I hear the noise out there also. I know what you've been receiving at the doors. I also know that we deliver hundreds of thousands of passenger trips every day, and we don't hear from those people. But if it's your trip and you're late, you don't care about the other 300,000 people that we've moved safely through the system. So I understand it. And so what I offer is some of the smartest people in the transit industry, you know, our team. We'll meet with you. We'll meet with your staff and hear about the issues and see what we can do. We are limited right now, though, in terms of we're transforming the entire system. And so it's not that staff want to defend that it's not occurring out there. It is occurring out there. And just like we did on some of the extension of the routes for the delay, we'll get innovative and do the best we can with the resources that we have.
Yeah, I'm not quite finished. I'm not sure that's enough. Like, I think there has to be a better plan. And yeah, I've worked with your staff for sure on the routes in my ward, but they've filled in some, but not enough. And I wonder what impact it's going to have on ridership retention in the long term when people, you can't be late for work on an ongoing basis without making another choice.
I understand. Ridership last quarter was up slightly. Again, I thank the customers for taking the service. I know there are situations where it's going to occur. We're going to get a snowstorm one of these days, and it'll be a challenge. But the focus, I believe, needs to be to continue to what we're getting in terms of this system and how it'll improve the system reliability and the performance of it. You have stage 2 coming also. That takes it even a step further. But we are in full detours on 5 segments of that transitway. That's always part of the plan. It's been part of the plan. We knew this was going to be a challenge. We don't have unlimited resources. If I had extra buses and extra people, I would deploy them. We do not have that. And you did buy extra buses for the detours, as you know. Those have all been fully deployed. And so we will work to the best of our ability to do what we can and to see if there's a reoccurring problem. I can't fix every one off, but if there's a reoccurring situation, there's something as simple as a bus stop needs to be moved, or maybe the trip should go a different way, we'll look at every opportunity.
And just a final question, I had asked for some financial accounting of where we are and what the cost overruns are. And you said today in your presentation that you're not ready to present that, but I'm wondering when you will be ready to present that.
I haven't seen the draft yet. I know I'll ask the Treasurer to speak to that. But just to also give you assurances, we're doing everything that we've told you we're doing. Like, we penalized our RTG $1 million for the November 2nd date. That gets lopped off for their next bill. So perhaps the Treasurer can answer on the memo.
We are meeting with Mr. Manconi and his management team this Friday, actually, to go through the numbers one more time to make certain that we've captured everything. So I would anticipate within the next 2 weeks we'll have a memo issued for Council.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, John, and your team. Very informative this morning, and we're getting there. Just a couple of questions. So the simulation that you showed us at 4 in the morning or whatever, and tried to jam the system and back it up and all those sorts of things. So there were no people involved in that, though, correct? That was not a scenario where we had people getting on and off of the buses. That's yet to come?
Yeah, the risk on the bus piece isn't significant. The people on the trains is the simulation that we want to do, Councillor Deans' point. That's what we want to see in terms of wayfinding and so forth. The issue on those transfer points where they're some of the busiest transfers in North America, we wanted to make sure the buses could do all the maneuvers in those transfer areas.
Okay. So the next phase is to put people on the vehicles or through the fare gates, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, we've talked a lot, and Councillor Deans raised it about concerns about the existing service, and you have said that we're going to see a significant change when the train gets into play and is working. But I guess my question is, I grew up in Montreal, we have a subway system, stuff happens. So in terms of managing expectations, on opening day, opening week. What is likely the biggest challenge for the rider? I mean, this is not going to be the magic bullet. It's not going to fix everything just because the train is there. So if I was going to be taking that train the first week, what expectation would you be working most to manage for me as an existing rider or as somebody who's wanting to try the system? What do you think is not going to work or is not going to work as well as people anticipate it might, if you get where I'm going?
Certainly. So I'll start at the outcome level. The outcome level, where does the enhancements to reliability on bus service improve? It's simple. You don't have buses that are going to have to go through the core interlining. So that's on the outcome base. And routes can stay more in the east, west, and south and focus on that. On the what the customer lens, you'll recall we did customer journey mapping where we took various customers through the design of this system and we pulled out what are all the things they liked and what are all the potential pain points, the transfer being one of the most critical. So we're bringing a report to Transit Committee once we know what the RSA date, and we will walk you through everything we've done to map out those issues. We will also share with you all the plans that we have in place, which includes having hundreds of people out visible for the first couple of weeks, helping people through fare gates and things like that. And we have flushed out through numerous workshops what are the issues, what can go wrong, and what are the contingency plans, because you're absolutely right. Things will go wrong. The train will break down one day. What do? You go to what's called bus bridging service like they do in Montreal, Toronto, New York, and Boston. We have bus bridging signage that you're going to see. We're going to, through the Ready for Rail campaign, incrementally start to educate the public on all of those elements that you're pointing to, Councillor. And that's why when I meet with RTG, I say the RSA date is important, not just because we launch, but I have hundreds of thousands of customers that we need to educate, and we want to do that incrementally and not a big bang. That's all ready to go and ready to be launched as part of the Ready for Rail campaign. And so it's incremental feeding to our customers, lots of visibility for weeks during the opening, and I want to thank all the city departments because they're volunteering just like they did with the election. They're going to be trained, they're going to be visible out there, and we know what the pain points are, that the potential pain points that the customers have talked about. And then, like anything, after your first couple of trips, you become accustomed to it and you know your routine. But we've gone the extra mile to make sure that where is that transfer point for your bus, signage, wayfinding, all those things. We've identified that through the various focus groups.
So next question, and I know I won't pin you down on a date. We've all tried for months to do that, the media, us. I know we're not going to get a date from you today, but you've said first quarter is your best expectation. Are you getting any advice? I know we've got our independent panel of experts reviewing the whole thing. Are we getting any advice as to concerns about a midwinter opening versus a spring opening? Are there issues in and around that?
Well, no railroad system wants to open up in the winter because it presents another challenge, but what do you do to mitigate that if we are into a winter launch? I have a crew right now with RTM, that's the Maintenance Consortium down in Boston. Boston went through the worst rail and LRT winter disaster years ago. You can Google it and see what happened. They had trains shut down for days. The lessons learned from that, the equipment, the deployment of resources, we tapped into them years ago. We've taken that in. They're out there seeing that firsthand. RTM has specialized equipment that they're out there testing right now. We've seen all that. We've had the independent assessment team look at that. And then we're doing a lot of best-in-class scenarios for winter plans, which, for example, don't shut down your service overnight if it's freezing rain or snowing. Keep the trains running so your track stays clear and so forth. So we're mitigating all those things. And on the ground at OC Transfer, we have a few thousand years of experience of rail operators that have not just operated systems, but they are also tested and commissioned. They're embedded with our teams, training them on all these things. And RTM is a very good general manager on their maintenance side that I have an excellent relationship with.
Okay. And last question. This is the last meeting of this committee for this term of council, and there's a bit of a gap before we get committees up and running again. How are updates going to be handled between now and when we have we have a new FEDCO or whatever we might call it in the next term of council. How is that going to be managed if there's something that comes up that we need to know about?
So a couple of things. Our quarterly memos will continue. I know we have one coming out, I believe it's on the 20th November. And then obviously this file reports to the mayor's office, so I'll take guidance from him and the city manager if there's any major updates on that. But I suspect, maybe I'll ask the city manager to comment, as we've done in the past, if there's significant milestones we've communicated through memo. So.
Yeah, I mean, my only concern, and I appreciate that, is if we want to have a format like this where questions can be asked, though, I guess that's where I'm going between now and when we get the next committee. I think we need some sort of a thought put into that.
Well, I think as the general manager said, Councillor, if there is information, it'll be shared with everyone. Every council is in this interim period where we don't have our new committee structure set up, but we're all going to be sworn in on December 1st, and we'll be available if there's a need for an emergency meeting of any kind. I'll certainly be pleased to call one. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Taylor, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much, Mr. Manconi, Mr. Cripps. You've done an exceptional job, not just with the system, but with your update today and with your presentation, the fullness of your presentation and my colleagues' questions. Most of my questions have been knocked off. I do want to say thank you very much for the route changes that you were able to implement in my ward, the 151, 153, to patch the western extension of the 11. Although I do share Councillor Dean's, Councillor Eglei's concern that we're going to get to a scenario where we need to manage that expectation for people that day one of rail, we're not suddenly in a position where we have an abundance of buses now that can fill every gap and address every issue. So I'm hopeful to see how that rolls out positively. My one question left from the presentation, you covered all the others, was you did articulate that it was a bit of an advancement having everything integrated in the TOCC in one room. And of course my thoughts immediately went to what happens if that room goes down. So I'm sure you've got a redundancy plan for that, but I'd love to hear you say that.
We have 2 redundancy rooms, one for rail over at RTG, and we have a full integrated one that we have at OC Transpo. They're all confidential locations, and it has been tested also. We did a stress test on that also.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Chernyshenko, please.
Yes, thank you. We've covered a lot of the big questions, but this one's no less important. You know that I and the mayor have both been asking about the bird-friendly status of the glass that did get media coverage again a few weeks ago. And what is the progress on, I suppose, whether we need to be installing decals after the fact on some glass, or whether we've proactively moved to glass that won't need that sort of after the fact treatment?
So Councillor, through you, Mr. Mayor, we responded to, I apologize, I can't remember the association. We gave them some of our responses. Mr. Cripps can elaborate on that in a moment. And so it's the best we can do right now. To be candid, I don't have a team of people working on this. It's important, but it's not a priority right now in terms of everything else. We have done some mitigation measures, which I'll ask Mr. Cripps to elaborate on the response that he provided.
Yeah, so certainly the designers, I think, have factored in 3 major things. So fritted glass, so the glass does have a pattern in it as one of the common techniques used to reduce bird strikes. The lighting of the stations is designed to sort of minimize the attraction of birds. The overhang is part of that strategy as well. And sort of minimizing vegetation in the, substantial vegetation in the area of the station is one of the things that will prevent birds from nesting in that area and then sort of attracting them to the station. So off the top of my head, they're sort of the main strategies that are commonly in use and are used on this system.
I know there are a number of techniques for doing it. What I really want to know is that we're not digging a deeper hole, so to speak. That work that choosing the right design, as with the glass here, looking forward to future phases, so that we won't have added expense later. Do it right once at the start, as opposed to having to retrofit afterwards, is the most common sense and economically sensible solution as well. So that be on your radar, that I may nag you regularly, so that it remains on your radar, is I think very important, obviously for the birds, but ultimately for the taxpayer as well, as that issue becomes more and more known and the demand may grow for the city to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation, Mr. Mayor Conan. A couple of questions for you. As some of the other councillors alluded to, there's concern with the transit system as it's operating today. We've asked a lot of our riders to be patient until the LRT comes in. One of the messages I heard from your staff and from you was that the existing buses are going to be taken out of service, like they haven't been maintained, on their last legs. What's the status of those buses going into Q2, if that's where we're waiting for the end of Q1? Will those buses still be there? Are we going to, if we slip another date, are we going to have to do something about that? Because we're seeing a lot of, as Councillor Dean said, routes being canceled and these old buses being put on those routes right now. And I'm really afraid that we're not going to have something to fill those gaps.
No, that's a great question. I can assure you that we are making our fleet count every single day. Mr. Greer, he's the head mechanic. He's doing a phenomenal job, and it is a challenging job because those vehicles, just to be clear, we are maintaining them. They just didn't have their midlife rehab and all those major programs, reupholstering and all that done to them because we knew they were end of life. And when we heard from RTG about the delay, he put a plan in place to ensure that those vehicles can continue. And yes, there are daily swapping out of vehicles, as there are every day if we're down a vehicle or there's a breakdown and so forth. But I can assure you the plan is to continue maintaining the fleet till we need them, and then we dispose of those 180 so vehicles.
Okay. My other question is to do with the $1 million penalty that you mentioned too. $1 million to most of us is a lot of money, but in the scheme of this contract, $1 million really isn't that much. And I'm just wondering if it's worked at all as any kind of an incentive to get things done, or should we be looking at in the next contract to be done that those penalty levels be much higher?
So two things on that. Just a reminder. It's a P3, and RTG is also not getting their $4 million a month maintenance payment from us. And there are a bunch of confidential numbers from the lenders and penalties and sub-penalties worth millions of dollars that they're feeling every month. So they're incentivized to move as quickly and as effectively as they can, remembering that there's a 30-year maintenance agreement that they get. So they want to build the system, because I get this question also, well, how do you know they're not going to circumvent and lower their standards? It's not in their best interest for 30 years worth another $1 billion to do things on the cheap. So, and we have oversight on them also. But the other thing is Mr. Swale and his team, who works for me on Stage 2, he's been tasked with a deep dive on lessons learned from Stage 1. We heard everyone loud and clear on what can we do differently, better, and so forth. And when he brings forward that report, when we bring you that Stage 2 report, you'll see a whole section on lessons learned on how we've changed things in terms of milestone payments and so forth on that regard. So exactly to your point, Councillor, what did we learn on Stage 1 on everything from design to administration of the contract, payments, cash flow, and so forth, and how do we bring that forward? And
will there be some sort of report come forward?
It'll form part of the contract award when we bring that forward to you, so you'll have clear line of sight into those areas.
Thank you. My last question is to do with the preparations that you're doing for the launch. I can visualize the loading of the trains going relatively smooth because big doors, 600 people can get on 2 cars. It should go relatively smooth. The onload, however, I don't visualize as going quite so smooth, getting those 600 people onto, 7 double-deckers, and get those double-deckers out of wherever the train stop is. Is there going to be actual practices done of the load and unload, like with people?
Yes, that's exactly Councillor Deans' point, and it goes all the way to the bus issue also. So two things. There's 14 doors on these trains, a lot of doors for that in and out movement. And then what we learned through the focus group is everyone understood, because of the frequency of service, you don't have to panic if you miss your train. You wait for less than 5 minutes, the next train will come. What the focus group opened our eyes to is my connection home, from train to bus. So is my bus going to be waiting there? So we went to Montreal and other areas like Chicago where they have big bus transfers. They've done some very innovative things on signage and how to stage those buses and have supervisory staff there ready. So we're not concerned about the loading and unloading. What the customers have told us, and we've heard them loud and clear, is, will my bus be there waiting for me on that snowy day to go home? So we've got some mitigation measures that we've implemented that we hadn't thought about. We learned through the customer focus groups.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Ubley. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good morning. Thank you, Mr. Manconi, for your update. The video was very impressive to see the stations, and was on Queen Street last week, and Queen is finally looking much better. It was possible to establish May of 2018 as the original opening date, and that was established years in advance. And when that date was missed, November 2nd was identified, and we missed that date. And now, as we are the closest point to actually opening, we're not able to get a date. We're now looking at a quarter, identifying Q1. And my comment is I'm concerned because RTG should be able to know what those remaining tasks are and should be able to estimate what each task takes to do. And so, do you know why a specific date has not been established and released?
So back to what I was saying in the presentation, two things. RTG owns the date. It's their contract, and they're accountable for bringing that date to us. And I know the public looks to the city and saying, you missed the date. We did not miss the date. RTG missed the date, and they're being penalized accordingly, and they're losing money through the cash flows of the P3's environment and so forth. What we don't want is another date that we get everybody focused on, and then it's seen as a failure. And as I've said in some of my media interviews, are we chasing a date, or are we chasing a safe, reliable system that meets the $2.1 billion that's outlined in the project agreement? And we've been relentless with RTG to saying we're not changing the standards, we're not changing the designs, we're not changing the service level. Why? You're converting the busiest BRT, day one, full loads, to LRT. And we have said to them over and over again, and we're now meeting, the city manager, myself, and Mr. Cripps are meeting with the executives of that group every week, and we've said, you give us a date when you can prove and demonstrate you can get to that date. Why would we put another date out there to our customers when we don't have from them the high level of confidence that we need to see? So do they have a list of things they need to do? It's the last slide. Those 7 things need to be articulated, and they need to achieve them. Now, if I walk in their footsteps, they don't know if they're going to pass trial running.
Yeah.
If they don't pass trial running, they can't move to the next phase. So we've been diligent with them on saying you need to think through all those scenarios, and what you saw today is incrementality in terms of steps moving forward, that they're starting to get into that zone that I said I wanted to see from the testing and commissioning.
But just to be clear, it's RTG who has established Q1 2019, is that correct?
It was a date in the contract that both parties agreed to.
Okay, and I guess my point today is, given that they are the experts in identifying and completing the remaining tasks, I would expect that these international experts would be able to provide greater certainty on that RSA date. And that's my only point today. Can you just give any more details on the ongoing discussions regarding the cost recovery? You talked about the memo that will be released within 2 weeks, that you've been, it's 5 months now into cost overruns. How
have the discussions, even preliminary discussions, been on not just the $1 million you wanted to hold back on the next payment, but the millions of cost overruns that we do want to recoup going forward? Is there anything that you can share with the committee?
Absolutely. So to go back, you recall we brought it a restated transit budget based on November 2nd. So that's how the books are aligned. A reminder, we have all the cash. We have not given them their substantial completion payment, and their RSA payments is worth, Mr. Cripps, $261 million. That's what we hold. They have not seen a nickel of that. The city manager has been crystal clear. We recover our costs through deductions of those payments. And yes, to be candid, they can always take us to court and say we don't like that and so forth. But what myself, the legal team, Mr. O'Connor's team, the treasurer and so forth, the integrated city team, and external experts are doing is using every mechanism through the project agreement to recover those costs. And we are tracking all of those, and we have to do the forecast, which Ms. Similek and her great team are looking at, because you recall we had things such as ridership bump for 2018 and so forth. So we're tracking all of those, and we have articulated that position to RTG.
Finally, my last question on a lighter note, can you just give the committee an update on your discussions with potential retailers in stations? You were talking about busking or buskers. Can you just talk about the livability and what options riders will be able to get in each station, or in the main stations at least?
So, Councillor, I like that word, that livability, because it's exactly what we're trying to achieve. We have some small retail spaces in them, and the transit industry has not been very good at leveraging those assets. So we're not experts in that, so we've gone out to market to look for organizations from the private sector that can come up with those spaces, and we said we're very innovative. You can bring national, international companies, or you can use it to stimulate local businesses. So we've talked to our economic and development group. They're part of the review team. Buskers, we will be licensing buskers within the stations, pop-ups and so forth, so that we can have that livability, but you do it in a structured format. So it's welcoming, it's safe, it's inclusive, it's reflective of your community. So it's not about chasing the money in terms of those retail spaces, because they're very small. But what we've said is a minimum threshold is it can't cost us any money. So minimum break even, and then if we make a profit, that's a bonus on that. So that's, I believe it's out to market in terms of, we went out once, we didn't like the respondents, so we're back out again. With our economic development team helping us out in that regard.
All right, thank you. Deputy Mayor Manette, please.
Thank you. Just, obviously a lot of questions were answered, but there was one that touched interest, was the transition from FEDCO today to when the new members will be sitting. I know you mentioned that, yes, you would be in contact with the mayor directly. Now, I guess the question I would have is, looking around the table of FEDCO right now, there's two members that will not be with the next committee and the next council. So really you would have a quorum if needed, if there was urgent update that you have to bring forward. And asking the city manager also, would this be possible to call a meeting of FEDCO and the existing members to provide that information, because they are still elected officials?
I think we're looking for Mr. O'Connor to respond to that one.
Apologize for that, Mr. Mayor. The way the schedule is currently being laid out, you probably would not have a standard FEDCO meeting until February. Having said that, if it's decided in December that Council does establish FEDCO and the terms of reference don't change, then yes, there would be the possibility of calling an earlier meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Nussbaum, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning. Just a couple of quick questions. I know a lot of ground has been covered. But returning for a moment to the revenue service availability date, I recall when we were discussing the RSA date last year or earlier in the year, when we were anticipating, I think it was May 24th. Don't know if that date is exactly right. Mr. Manconi talked about how the revenue service availability date didn't equal the time when the trains would actually be running, that there would be a period of, I think it was a number of weeks, 4 to 6 weeks or something, that OC Transit would have ownership of the system but would need to run its own testing. And so just for clarity's sake, when we talk about Q1 2019, that's the revenue service availability date will take place in Q1, I think is what Mr. Manconi is saying. So the question is there still an expectation that there will be a period of a number of weeks before the trains actually start running thereafter?
Yes, that's a good question. Our position has been and continues to be, once we have the RSA date, OC Transpo needs between 7 and 10 days to do some final operational things, and then we could launch service. And then we would run parallel bus service for about 3 weeks in the event that there's issues on the system. So it's a safeguard to the operation. So that continues to be the plan. So once you get RSA, they achieve it, we can then look to about 7 to 10 days to get into launch mode.
Okay, thank you. I'm interested in, this might be more of a legal question, but I'm interested contractually in the status we're in where RRTG has not provided a date. Does the contract allow RRTG to essentially not provide the city with a date for revenue service availability?
So RTG has up to 60 days to give us a revised RSA date from the November 2nd date.
Okay, so that's in the contract. So they've got until January 2nd to give us a date. And let's say they give us a date and then they don't meet it. Is there an opportunity again for the $1 million in liquidated damages?
I'll ask Mr. Cripps to walk through this. He's an expert in this area.
The quick answer is yes. If they provide a new date to us, the city accepts that date. That becomes the new revised RSA date, and if indeed they were to miss that date, another $1 million liquidated damages would apply.
Great, thank you. Turning now to payments, I know that there, I believe, are 2 payments. One is substantial completion, and one is RSA. Do I have that right? And could you just remind us what the order of those 2 payments are?
The 2 payments, so substantial completion is roughly $59 million, and the RSA payment is roughly $202 million.
And what is the order of those? So which one takes place first?
Substantial completion takes place first.
And what would be the expectation for approximately how many weeks before RSA would the expectation be that substantial completion actually occurs? What would be the normal expectation in that regard?
That would really be up to RTG to determine that, provide those dates to us. They contractually, they need to give us a countdown notice to RSA, to substantial completion, and then they need to give us 10 days notice of substantial completion. Once that is achieved, trial running can happen. Once that is achieved according to the project agreement, RSA can be achieved after that. So the timing in there is variable. It could be in the original dates in the contract. Substantial completion was May 7th, I believe, and RSA was May 24th. So, roughly 3 weeks gap. But that's not a defined gap. It would be really up to RTG.
And if I heard correctly, if I understood correctly, I think I heard Mr. Manconi say that the city would plan on deducting the cost that the city has incurred as a result of the delay in the RTG from the payment. Would that be from the substantial payment from the first one?
The $1 million liquidated damages Mr. Manconi spoke to would be deducted from substantial completion.
Okay, what about, and I know there's a memo coming outlining the cost that the city has incurred as a result of the delay in the RSA date. Would the city plan on holding those that amount back from one of those two payments?
That is the direction we're taking.
Okay.
And as I've said, it doesn't mean that RTG is going to be accepting of that, and they won't challenge us on that, and that we'll have lawyers talking about the pros and cons of that. So there's always a risk with those things, but that is the direction from the city manager.
Great. And that would be deducted from the substantial completion payment?
We're not there yet. The concept is that we're deducting it from those payments rather than having to chase them for the money. But there's a lot of moving parts to all this. It's complicated in terms of collecting all the costs and looking at the pros and the cons and that legal analysis. And obviously, we don't want to be doing this in a public forum in terms of what those pros and cons are.
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Blade, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Manconi and Mr. Cripps. I think this is by far the most positive presentation we've had on LRT in quite some time, so thank you for your efforts on that. I want to focus on the customer experience a little bit. These technical details are important, obviously, but I trust that we have the capacity internally to deal with them over the coming months. But as a customer who's anticipating this new thing that we're getting, right, the new car that we're about to get, I know that we have the Ready for Rail campaign, and that's been on ice for a bit as a result of the delays. When would we expect, do we need an RSA date to go to the next steps of that campaign, or can we do some of that work without knowing the RSA date? As an example, technically, could we say today, Councillor Blais, you live in this part of Orleans, if you were to get on your bus at 7:30, when the train opens, this is what your trip would look like today, as an example?
Yes, and we're thinking through exactly that. That's a great point. The team that's on this is looking at what can we put out there without causing... I don't want to put something out there then have to retract it. So exactly to your point, I think there's some of that we can put out there. We are waiting for the access to the stations to do some video footage, because that's also very good, and then we would pump that out through your various Twitter feeds and so forth. We had a very good discussion the other day on the new website is almost ready to go. We want to do some customer focus group testing on that. And the challenge with that is you could launch it, but then all your routes aren't in place, so until you have that date. So yes to some of that, and I think we can do some of those in increments. But the good news is we're ready to go once we know what that RSA date is to take care of the customer. Because I agree with you 100%. It's about wrapping the service around the customer. It's about taking care of them every step of the way, and that's what they told us on all those 150 focus group sessions or people that we interviewed.
Excellent. And just on the notification periods. So between now and January 2nd, we expect RTG to give us some kind of new revised RSA date, and we'll either accept it or not. If they were to come back and say, okay, the date is 20 days from now, that seems like a short notice. Like, what is the minimum amount of time they're required to give us? And two, what is our view on, or I guess what would be the decision-making matrix on whether we think that's a good date from a customer experience point of view? Like, do we want to start running this on the third week of February, I guess is what I'm getting at. And will that be a report to committee to say these are your options, or is that something that we've already delegated authority to you to do? Can you maybe walk us through that?
So I'll let Mr. Cripps speak to the mechanics of the contractual obligations in a moment. But to your point of when's a good date, we have a whole matrix scenario of what day of the week, what day of the month. We have to transition our employees through booking operations. We have to transition the customers. We have your quarterly bus changes. So it's not just they can throw a dart and pick a date and we accept it. We layer on all the customer-facing and the governance pieces that you've given us onto that scenario, and then we say to them, yeah, it's a good date or not. We had a workshop with them, and they understood the complexity. As I told them, yeah, it's complex for you to build it. It's very complex for our customers because they're going through the most significant change ever. So we layer on all those pieces to that, and they can't just pick a date and we say, yeah, we agree with it in terms of that. So they had their eyes opened in terms of the complexity of that. I asked Mr. Cripps to share with you the contract piece.
There is a minimum gap upon which they'd have to give us notice, and I believe the contract calls for 30 days as a minimum from when they give us notice to when RSA happens.
Okay. Anything else, Councillor?
No, that's it, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Tierney, please.
Great. Thank you very much, John and Steve, for the update. Positive one, which is good news. I'm seeing a lot of work taking place on the 417 to 174 eastbound ramp, and I think we've discussed this, John. Originally there was a plan, and it's a concern to the eastern councillors because all the traffic during this whole cycle for the last 2.5 years, 3 years of fun, has all gone down Ogilvie Road, Montreal Road, and Innes Road. And the sooner we can return to regular traffic levels in the community, the better. Knowing originally there was probably a 1-month period because of the 2-week parallel system and everything else that went along with it, is there any opportunity to reduce when that ramp would open up again, considering the delays that we've had so far?
Yes, you and all the Eastern councillors have certainly talked to me about that. There's another integrated team that's looking at unpacking all the detours. Remember the work going into them. We have to put them all back out or undo them. And the mission I've given Mr. Landry is there a way to make that ramp the first to be released? I can't guarantee you that. You know how Phil is. He's very meticulous on these things. There's a lot of rules with MTO that we need to follow and so forth. We need the buses totally out of that lane. So it's at the top of the list, but I can't have the mixed traffic of that interchange because MTO won't permit that, and we certainly wouldn't encourage that. You'd be putting a risk. It is at the top of the list in terms of priorities. We understand the impact to the Eastern community, and you've all spoken to me about it. You have, Councillor Blais, Councillor Manette. Message received.
And thank you for that. And if it's okay for the next meeting we have, I guess it would be in the new term of council, if you can bring us an update, because we do see all the heavy machinery. They lifted the barriers. They're doing the reconditioning of that ramp now. So people are asking me every day, oh, when's it opening? Are they going to move the pylons and start the traffic flowing? And I have to say, okay, we've got to pump the brakes. We're not quite there yet. And it would be able to great to go back and give them an update within my community. So thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cripps and Mr. Manconi, for a very thorough update. A lot of work has been done since we last met. I think the video, I've been getting overwhelmingly positive tweets from people who are very excited about seeing the stations and going from end to end. So obviously we're down to the crunch time, and we very much appreciate all the long hours you and your team have been putting into this particular project, which, as we all know, is the largest infrastructure project in our city's history. So thank you for a job well done. Notices a motion for consideration of subsequent meeting. Any written inquiries? Adjournment. Motion to adjourn. Carried. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.